Anders. As I explained in Discord, I'm trying to reduce the time it takes to convey the big picture. And the target audience are actually those who've already figured out enough about media fakery to be skeptical of the alternative explanations, the approved conspiracies, the Candace Owens level stuff. And there's a lot of them. So one of the reasons why I'm focusing on this right now is that there's a lot of people out there who don't fit into the duopoly, the mainstream alt duopoly. And so we're offering a third perspective. So the mainstream and the alt mainstream, they have very predictable conclusions. We know their perspective. There's no mystery there. There's no new investigation. All their rabbit trails are actually paved, which should tell you something. Our perspective, what we term off-world stage, is inclusive of a number of things they ignore, specifically news bending, which is just a way of describing how psychological operations contaminate the entire media ecosystem. Two, we talk about the predictive and concurrent programming content within entertainment for a few reasons, which I'll explain shortly here. And then we talk about the role of special effects and psyops in general, how they're performed, and hoax indicators. And finally, we talk about history bending, which is the long-term effect of accumulated bent news. So as far as the programming stuff, this is where we're adding to the discussion, because one of the things that doesn't make it into the mainstream or alternative paradigm is the significance of fakery, which they largely think we overstate, and they resisted even accepting it as true, self-evident. But they also haven't figured out what it tells us. They don't look into it. They haven't solved it. The alternative media and the mainstream media believe that the concurrent and predictive content in entertainment that mirrors the major event of the day, they assume these things are in fact mere coincidences with no intentionality implied or to be assumed or even possible. And from their perspective, it's not possible, because from this perspective, mainstream and alt, because it's a single perspective. I mean, it's a duopoly, two sides of the same coin, but they don't know about news bending. They haven't thought about it. Although if you're in alt media, you must already accept the premise. You would have. To even accept that one of the fake events that we describe was just staged and fake is to accept it was planned in advance. Planned in advance to do what? To become news. To become, therefore, history. So all we're talking about is that the history bending events that we experience vicariously through media are indicators of manufactured history in the making every day. And we can look at the long-term effects of it to arrive at this. So what we're talking about here is media ecosystem as worldview shaper. So your perspective, your worldview is manufactured for you if you are someone who believes that mainstream media is objective and that the news are just reporting facts, getting information. So the news shows up after the event happens and they report back to you. So if you think the news is informing you, your perspective is mainstream media. Your opinions would likely survive Wikipedia. They wouldn't be deleted. You're Wikipedia approved. ChatGPT would provide you all the answers that also conform to that worldview. And most people don't deviate from that as a perspective. Why would you? The perspective that we're offering here, that we're describing, the off-world stage perspective, is relatively new. In fact, we're really the only ones who've codified it beyond just stating the obvious things are fake, or that looks fake, or news lies, or entertainment is infused with propaganda. We've added to the discussion And one of the things that we've added to the discussion that I find to be consistently and aggressively opposed is the self-evident fact that entertainment propaganda and news propaganda share a same source. What I mean is, what we consistently find is not mere coincidence. When something on Hulu perfectly matches an event, we'll just say, for an example, an assassination, and then the subsequent episodes track with the main character of the event. So, for example, Erica Kirk continuing to have a character arc that is mirroring her Hulu character. So you can say, well, that's just a coincidence. Well, you can say that if you look at it in isolation, but I'm saying the preponderance of evidence that we brought forth, empirical research, would actually rule in favor of it being intentional. And this in particular, especially if you think that Kirk is not organic but is following a script. But this is a huge can of worms, because when you recognize this, now it becomes something graspable and tangible. It's not just an eerie coincidence from the universe, but now you can name names. You can say this director was involved in this particular psyop. So we're talking about the entertainment and psyop connection, what I call the psyop entertainment complex. This is what they hide. So all the people who are mad, raging, angry at the military-industrial complex, they're mad. They celebrated the death of Cheney. Okay, those people are mad at the military-industrial complex. And I'm saying that this is actually a plot device on the world stage, but the real thing that you should be focused on is the PSYOP entertainment complex. And the truthers want to ignore this, just so you know. Nobody's focusing on this. They want to mock it. They want to call us tinfoil hatters. The conspiracy theorists want to call us conspiracy theorists. Oh, don't listen to them. They're conspiracy theorists. It's like, what are you? And if you're a mud flutter, like, I'm not knocking that stuff. I understand that we're all looking at stuff that we fundamentally don't trust, and so we're looking at alternative explanations for history. But I would ask you to look closely at this, because there's a point where news becomes history. And instead of having our heads in the mud, instead of looking back 200-300 years at old pictures and never arriving at something conclusive because it's out of reach, we should focus on the real-time history bending. And so that's kind of where we're starting with this whole thing, is that we're talking about proactive creation of history, not just retroactively retconning things, but we're talking about planned historic events. The 9/11s, the George Floyds, the Charlie Kirks, the things that steered the dominant paradigm, the things that get so much attention that everybody's saturated with it. And these are the historic events that go down in your textbooks. Like the death of Charlie Kirk is the turning point at which we saved Western civilization. According to Jack Posobiec, that's what's going to be said by historians 100 years from now. You can look at 9/11 or 2020. These are events that you could see as major plot twists. And what I'm suggesting is that these plot twists are inorganic, planned in advance. And this is where it gets into the significance of the PSYOP entertainment complex. So we're looking not at false flags, but at staged events. We're not looking at attacks planned 20 years ago. We're talking about fake events planned 20 years ago. So if you can accept the premise that PSYOPs are planned a few months in advance, what's the difference between a few months and a few years? We shouldn't look at this as that controversial of a proposition here. And the stuff that's really damning, the stuff that the coincidence theorists can't explain away, are the real-time releases. So I'm just going to list a couple, just so you know. This has been an ongoing thing. So the Roe v. Wade leak, talking about 2022, corresponding with Game of Thrones, House of the Dragon, with the death in childbirth. So we have that one. We have the Uvalde. And this one's interesting. Honestly, this one actually ties into Annunciation, which is a separate topic, but not really. So Uvalde with the corresponding Stranger Things premiere for the season, and then the NBC FBI finale. Then we're talking about the Waco American Apocalypse that came out as Trump kicked off his campaign in Waco. Of course, we have numerous Butler, Pennsylvania connections. So I'll just list a couple. There's The Boys, season 4, episode 8. We're really 6, 7, and 8. You have the phone on. I should have had it on already. So if you're trying to call in, just give me a minute or leave a voicemail. I'm going to put here Mickey 17. I'm going to put down Batman, Caped Crusader, Megalopolis is a big one. So just a handful. But we're talking about real time. And then we're just going to skip to the more recent ones really quick here. I also want to actually add Sinners and Mountainhead. So we'll do Mountainhead. Mountainhead, which is about the Musk-like character, and it had to do with generative AI and riots, and this concurrent with the LA riots and No Kings. We'll put down the Louvre Crown Jewels heist, and the Netflix Lupin, where Marie Antoinette's necklace was stolen, let them eat cake. And this one's funny for a few reasons. So if you don't know about this one, the crown jewels were stolen as on Lupin, Marie Antoinette's necklace was stolen, and this was during the No Kings protests. So you have No Kings, crown jewels stolen, and on the TV show, Marie Antoinette's necklace stolen. And this is during No Kings, well, she lost her head during a No Kings protest. Well, Drudge had Donald Trump as Marie Antoinette, which is hilarious, given the context of how in Lupin they stole her necklace. And they have him saying, let them eat steak, talking about the opulence of Mar-a-Lago compared to the 42 million without food stamps for Thanksgiving. But you can see the irony in the storytelling when the dominant entertainment or news events are mirrored by real life events, protests, politicians, and their antics. We were just, again, talking about this is a reoccurring thing. It's systemic fakery. We should also add, of course, Charlie Kirk, Hulu, and Heads of State, and Americana, numerous podcasts. In fact, I just tweeted something today with Erica Kirk, how she had this little promo video for who she is and stuff, and it shows her playing basketball in college, and she's 11, and the person next to her is number 22. We're just pointing out how in all of their PR releases, you often find clues to their character. And so her association with 1122, obviously, an easy tie-in to the JFK stuff, and of course there's a lot of JFK, CK overlap. But the CK thing, and these are undeniable concurrent releases, Heads of State, Hulu, The Tempest, and then her real life, how her quote real life and how it's been represented is actually part of it, Americana. And there are numerous other ones. We don't even have to bring up Snake Eyes. We don't have to refer to those. We're talking about the real time and how there's this pattern of significant events having real time media releases. We could even go back to the 60s with this, with, for example, Manchurian Candidate. And what is interesting about this one is obviously the mind-controlled assassin, Oswald. There's some connections there, even with Oswald having seen the movie. Another movie also with Sinatra, Suddenly. Same basic idea. But the director here for Manchurian Candidate, John Frankenheimer, drove RFK to the scene of his death at the Ambassador Hotel at the hands of a mind-controlled assassin. So the director of this movie Manchurian Candidate that brought the mind-controlled assassin out was personally affiliated with the Kennedys, specifically driving RFK to his death. So this is not something that's new. With 9/11, we have so many examples, it would take up an entire whiteboard. So there's a lot we could go to here, but the main thing is this. We're talking about how the concurrently released content that corresponds to the fake event of the day is not only a reoccurring theme, it's a pattern that we've noted, but it's not simply that these happen at the same time, because everything that's pre-recorded, all the movies, would have been produced in advance. So what I'm suggesting here is that at a very minimum, we're looking at history bending a few years in order to have this level of coordination. So our starting point for this conversation isn't, are they manufacturing history proactively? Our starting point is, they're obviously manufacturing our history a few years in advance, but how far back does it go? How deep is it? How deep does this rabbit trail go? It's not even a rabbit trail. It's actually it's a linear path here. So let's start with, and this is how we're going to structure this. We're going to have a timeline like this, 1960, 2025. I'm going to put Manchurian Candidate. And I want to start getting into this process here of associated directors with their work with the PSYOP. So you have the director, you have the movie, and you have the PSYOP. And we're showing how these directors can be positively correlated with events. Not directly. I'm not saying like Stanley Kubrick literally directed 9/11 on that day. But I'm saying that a lot of his content fed into the PSYOP in the form of what we would consider to be product placement, foreshadowing, predictive content. And again, there's so much of it, and people can say, well, you're cherry picking. Well, you can't say that about the real-time releases. This is damning evidence. Damning evidence of history tampering, systemic media fakery used to build a manufactured worldview. And our worldview is a product of events. It's not just the geography and how the world looks, but it's the events that shape our collective agreement. And we're talking about a collective agreement. You know, in Leave the World Behind, which was an Obama production, Higher Ground production, the Obamas, there's this conversation about how, now they're talking about the internet and stuff, but Julia Roberts' character references this mass agreed upon collective delusion and how the power had gone off. And so that ceased to mean anything. The delusion was like turned off. You know, interesting film. If you haven't seen it, Leave the World Behind is a great example of predictive programming, among other things. And it also reveals, because when I'm talking about this level of media manipulation, we're talking about very subtle subtexts, very subtle propaganda messaging. Well, if you want to see these techniques used, Leave the World Behind is a great study. And what's even more interesting about it is that the author of the book that it's based upon, in this interview, smirked when he was called prescient, because his book predicted 2020 as far as lockdowns, everything shut down, people having to contend with themselves in isolation from everybody else. So the author of the book that became the movie Leave the World Behind was called prescient, practically prophetic. And he was questioned about this. And then the movie comes out, Netflix, and it is identified, not just by people watching it, but by the media as having many eerie coincidences with what followed. What's up, David John Rivington from Spain? So here's what we're getting at. is that by including the PSYOP entertainment complex, by factoring that into your assessment of world events, you have an explanation for the real purpose of fake news and staged events and PSYOPs. It's not just about one side winning the election or the other. It's not about politics. This is bigger than politics. This is worldview. It's not mere politics. And these staged events have a purpose, because these are what you can look at as the almost like guideposts on the historic timeline. So here we are, 1960. We're looking at this 2025. So you have the significant years, 2020. We'll go 2001, and then of course there's a lot of little things in between there. Like we're talking about like plot twists. So a big one for a lot of people obviously was we enter like this new era. So 2001, 2001, we enter this age of terrorism. But what was leading up to it in entertainment? Well, when we look into what led up to 9/11 within the realm of entertainment, you do have a buildup of themes that supported what happened on that day. And of course, we're talking about radical Islamic terror, these caricature villains and put into movies. And then you look at the directors who contributed to elements of that day with great specificity, such that these things are considered to be highly, predictive. So for example, Back to the Future is a classic. It even has Trump in it in the form of Biff Tannen. But Back to the Future has some very explicit 9/11 foreshadowing that we could address. And then 2001 Space Odyssey, and that's back from 1963. So type 1 was that 85? Well, anyway, 1963, 1985. We're talking about, no, actually it's 1968, excuse me. 2001 Space Odyssey was 68. So we have at least 33 years of predictive programming for 9/11. From Stanley Kubrick to James Cameron to, who's the guy that directed Collateral Damage? And then you've got Francis Ford Coppola. But there's endless fascinating connections here of clues, things that look like synchronicities from the universe, things that make people believe we're in a simulation. We have so many examples, and it's not just The Simpsons. In fact, The Simpsons are useless in this conversation because there are so many fake examples, but they have been known to platform predictive programming. These days, it's more like South Park. Like nobody knew who Charlie Kirk was, then he's on South Park. Like there's a purpose here. The entertainment puts memes on blast, characters on blast. It sets the stage mentally, psychologically, in your imagination. And it prepares you for the fake event that you're going to consume as a news consumer that will then be built onto your worldview. So your Truman Show is a work in progress. 10 years ago, your Truman Show didn't have pandemics and space junk and AI. Your Truman Show has updates, and what they're doing here is they're augmenting not just the real world changes, but the things that don't actually exist that they've created. Like they've kind of phased out the bowl cut racist shooter, and they brought in the left-wing ideologue shooters. Like that's been a kind of a plot twist. Which kind of brings up Uvalde and Annunciation. Another good one I should have put in here, concurrent or relatively same time, was Weapons. Weapons coming out before Annunciation, both of them related to one another in many significant ways. And it's not just numbers. I mean, there are some things here that I want to bring up that show that it's definitively the case that these are intentional. These are not coincidental connections because they're too specific. There's themes. So when it comes to something like the movie Weapons, well, one thing that's unique about the movie, and this is that movie Weapons, which is a school shooting allegory. One of the things that's unique about it is that it's narrated by a child. Anyone care to guess the unique thing about the following shooting at the Annunciation School? There are multiple overlaps. The villain, the redheaded witch. There's obviously the movie poster was a big one. the parents running barefoot to the school, and the movie poster, the kids running barefoot through the street. The number 217 relates to the proposed ban on assault weapons that failed, and it's 217 when the children disappear. So they included these numbers intentionally. These connections were made. But the movie Weapons, narrated by a child, well, when you watch the Annunciation school shooting, it's like 5-year-old crisis actors telling the story. You have some kid talking about his friend dying on top of him. And I'm like, wait, the school shooting associated with the movie, 2 dead, 17 injured, 217, you had all these overlaps, the imagery, the numbers, and it's narrated by a child. We've never had a mass shooting that on day one, we heard it from the mouth of the children, but we did hear. And again, it matched the movie. Louis G said, I heard you say that Nicolas Cage is Coppola's nephew. I don't know if that's true. I've heard people say it. What's interesting about Coppola's movie, if you haven't seen Megalopolis, this is a big one. Because Megalopolis has Caesar Catalina, which this is interesting too, because Julius Caesar's birthday is 7/13, and Trump was shot on 7/13. Harrison Ford, born 7/13, and he was playing a president shot at the podium on a trailer for Captain America, released the day before. MCU actually altered it as a result. But you got Caesar Catalina, who's Trump. He's building Megalon. They got that's like Babylon, make America, make Rome great again. He gets shot, but he survives, and it's a miracle. But this movie was actually meant to come out before 9/11 happened, and he pulled it because 9/11 happened. And the movie is about this Russian satellite hitting New York, and it creates this 9/11-like cataclysm. Well, as the movie was in not the big theaters, but it was being featured in film festivals, when it came out, the trailer came out, and you see what looks to be the satellite coming down, Statue of Liberty's in the background, New York blows up. And at the same time, a Russian satellite that was like 50-some years old exploded into 100 pieces, thousands of pieces, and they had to have everybody in the ISS locked down. So old Russian satellite kicks off the movie, ends America, resets history, becomes a world order. At the same time, a Russian satellite in space blows up. So that was before the movie even came out. We were noticing it was aligning with events. And he has said some very interesting things, Coppola. Another element to the movie that's really worth looking at is the design authority. The design authority looked like the strangers from a 9/11 era movie, Dark City, with their black-rimmed hats. And they have the power to stop time. And they're doing a detonation in downtown New York. So it's almost like you're watching them do 9/11. But the idea of them stopping time is actually a big part of the movie. Caesar Catalina controls time. So what does this mean, controlling time? Well, when I first saw the movie, I looked at Adam Driver and I was like, why does he look like Neo? And the movie's already got these 9/11 connections. Not only did Coppola delay it because of 9/11, but there's some shots in there from September 11, 2001 that he included in the catastrophe scene at the end of the movie. He actually used footage from that day, but he didn't release it because 9/11 dulled the impact of his film. So he gave it some time, but he infused it with Dark City, Stranger Things, the clock imagery, controlling time for a reason. He infused it with the Matrix. Neo obviously has the 9/11 connections. There's quite a lot you can say about Neo, but Adam Driver as Neo is a huge part of it because he has a relationship with his driver who talks to him. His driver is played by Lawrence Fishburne. And whenever they're driving around, it's very Matrixy. Neon lights, dark, raining, in the back of a car, like a cab. In the Matrix, Morpheus, Lawrence Fishburne, is explaining to Neo the nature of space, the Matrix. In this movie, in this new Francis Ford Coppola film, Megalopolis, it's the same dynamic. He's not Morpheus, but it's the same actor. Same dynamic. He's talking to the Neo-looking guy, and he's explaining to him about how time works. So you got space, time, and it's about this control over space and time. And this is where it ties in with the dark city, the black rim hats, this concept of the Saturnian element of control over time, space. So if you can control time, and that's what we're talking about here, you can pretty much control the reality. And what we're pointing out here is that the design authority in this movie might actually represent the metascriptors, the architects of our history, the ones who can, they don't necessarily stop time literally, but if they're planning things 20, 30 years in advance, they control time. We're talking about time control. So kind of a side topic, but not really, because the movie opens up with this excellent monologue about how empires fall and how it's told over a course of several generations in big stories. And I think the movie's a big reveal. But it's also very interesting that it has this Trump-esque character surviving an assassination attempt. It's a huge theme last year. But the design authority are what I would refer to as the metascriptors. So what is the metascript? Well, if, and this isn't really an if, because they're bending history. So you have your history, things going from A to Z in a certain trajectory in the objective world. But then you have the media's version, where things are augmented, things are manipulated, they add things that don't exist. So it's actually taking us in a slightly different direction, a different destination. And what changes it are the things they add, the fake things, the psyops. So you have a timeline of real events, and then we have a timeline that corresponds, that overlaps with the fake events. But people don't separate the real and the fake. Of course, these things have been merged. I like to have this kind of described as the sun and the moon, like how Kubrick does with the monolith. How we have the monolith is the movie screen that merges the two, the real and the fake, the fiction, reality, news, and movies. So the monolithic worldview is the result of the fusion. A manufacturing history, we're talking about fake things added onto the real. Because the real exists, whether you like it or not. We're not in a simulation. But the fake stuff is a mental simulation. It's a worldview that's superimposed. It's what Baudrillard would call hyper-reality, because we no longer make a distinction between the two. So what we're pointing out here is that both the mainstream and the alternative viewpoints are products of the monolith. The world stage, the worldview that you get, if your media content that you consume is all processed through their merged real and fake, you're getting your information, your worldview manufactured. You're getting it bent. You're resting every conclusion that you reach on the assumed reality of this, of hyper-reality. And we're separating the two and recognizing, of course, that whether you're mainstream or alternative, your frame of reference is still bent. So History Benders is about the long-term effects of mass media manipulation. But now here's where we're getting into the time control stuff. And thank you very much. Cope Aesthetics is IPS or bust. Appreciate the support. So here's where we're getting into the history bending, because we can all accept fake news, how lies affect what's happening right now and tomorrow and the next day, but it's like local, it's just, we're, contemporaneous. We're talking now about long term. So we take an event like 9/11 and then Charlie Kirk, and then we'll go with, let's see. I'm open to suggestions, but I want to start at least with these two. So I already talked about these ones. So 1968, 1998. Earliest examples of predictive programming for each event are what we need to start looking at. With CK, it's Snake Eyes, and that's 1998. Then we have Marx in 2012, and then, of course, 2025, leading up to it. But we're talking about the common denominators that exist in the programming leading up to the event that point to a common origin can be traced. So whether you're looking at heads of state, Tempest, Snake Eyes, podcast appearances, and otherwise, the earliest example that contains all the elements of predictive content, the storm, the name Tyler, the name Charlie Kirk or Kirkland, these are the repeated themes. Tyler, storm, the name, the date, September 10th, and the neck wound in a very specific place. So this handful of elements exist in every one of these examples leading up to the final event. Even in the 2025 heads of state, the lady getting shot in the neck. So that would tell us that the CK event was planned 27 years before it happened. With 9/11, I mean, if you could start, I would actually start with the Pentagon groundbreaking, which was 1941. So 9/11, 1941, the Pentagon. But we're talking about predictive content in movies. So the earliest example would be 1968, Space Odyssey. And if you're not familiar with that, we're going to go over these things later in detail when I'm in the studio, when I take these breakdowns and add video content to support what I'm saying. So Space Odyssey 2001, and a lot of this was broken down by Chartword, who pulled his website down, but I saved everything. And also, the interesting thing about that is that you have this scene in Space Odyssey on the moon where they're unearthing the monolith. And it looks eerily similar to Ground Zero, 33 years later, where the monolith Hilton is overlooking the devastation of Ground Zero. And the monolith Hilton is based on 2001 Space Odyssey. Not insignificant. And again, the meaning of the monolith, we can debate. I think a lot of people have come to this idea that it's the screen, which I agree, but I think when you go a little deeper, it's about the monolithic worldview. This is a new monotheism. This worldview has supplanted and replaced religion, which is why I don't even waste time with the religious debates of the day, because what I see has happened here is that the purposes of religions is the integration of large numbers of people, combining religions, and combining gods. You have these composite gods like Serapis, very well documented phenomenon of governments creating constructs to bind people into singular worldviews. Well, media has replaced that. It is the dominant religion. And I would say that a lot of these things, like this martyrdom story of CK or 9/11, I would consider these to be contemporary myths. We've got miracles. Walking on the moon is a miracle. We've got myths, miracles, martyrs. So now let's continue. So, okay, now another one I think we should kind of consider here is how far in advance was January 6th planned? Now, January 6th, 2021. And also the Q thing, QAnon. Did QAnon really just emerge in 2017? Are there examples of this having some kind of pre-existence? And there's some interesting things that I found. But what I'm pointing out is that we're going to be systematically going through event after event and then attempting to determine how many years of planning do they have for this event, and then how wide was the foreshadowing from the script disseminated. How wide has it gone? How many platforms do we find it in? And when I'm talking about the predictive content, I'm specifically referring to the common denominators, where you could rule out these just being random. And the CK thing is one of the best examples, because you've got the storm, you got the neck wound in a specific spot, which is a key point here. Because you could say, well, a lot of movies have people getting stabbed in the neck. Well, that's not really true. But if you want to go there, even the girl getting stabbed in the neck, there's a lot of neck stuff. Ryan Routh trying to stab himself in the neck in that same spot. But storm, neck, September 10th. The name Tyler as the executioner. And of course, the name Kirk. And when you look at these 5 elements, it's like 4 out of 5 of them are definitively present in all of the content leading up to the event. And some of it just looks random from the outside until you can kind of see where this traces back to. One of the best examples is episode 33 of Thought Crimes, where Charlie Kirk is talking to a guy. Charlie Kirk is talking to Tyler. And they're talking about executions. They're talking about an execution that took place on September 10th, 1977. They're talking about an execution where the blade, a guillotine, would have chopped the guy's neck. So there you have an example of Charlie Kirk talking to a guy named Tyler, specifically referencing these elements. Or you go to Emerson Drive 2012. Emerson Drive is a video called She's My Kind of Crazy. In the video, you have Erica Kirk. She's zip lining past 910 over Fremont. So there's two there. But then in the comments section, she says, "Hey, Tyler, that was a great shoot today, had a blast," which I would connect with execution. And the comment was made on September 10th, 2012. So again, repeating the same elements in each of these examples. Erica Kirk was also called the Storm at the CK Memorial, which ties into the Tempest and other things. But again, these repeated elements that date back to the 1998 Snake Eyes, which happens during the storm called Hurricane Jezebel. Charlie Kirkland is shot in the neck. The boxer is Tyler the Executioner. And the date was 9/18, but it's super ambiguous. Everybody said 9/10. The point was made. So we're talking about gathering the common denominators that would qualify our claim that these things are related enough to the original source material. So we need to go through the predictive content for 9/11 with the same type of lens here and determine what could you rule out as just coincidence and what can you rule in as intentional. And one of our main criteria here is that for it to be considered predictive programming, it has to be blasted to the multitudes. It's got to be mass media. It's got to be number one, like Hulu's release. It's got to be conceivable that the same demographic that experienced the PSYOP experienced the entertainment build up to it. So we are applying a bit of rigor here. And what I'm pointing out is that what we can deduce from all of the common denominators is the earliest instance of the event being presented in the realm of entertainment, or what I would consider to be propaganda. So we can make these claims, and this is the point. So we start making the point here that events like 9/11, historic events, significant events, are planned decades in advance. Well, it asks a lot of questions. It raises some questions. And one of the main points that I want to raise too, because I see this error in processing this. You got these big truther channels. Says one guy had assembled this collage of 9/11 predictive programming. Very impressive. And he said, look, they planned the attack in advance. And I was like, no, they planned the fake event in advance. So the assumed reality of it is the error. And their assumption is based upon their misunderstanding of what media is. They think the media showed up to report what was happening. And it's no. In that instance, the media was producing it, because media is a very good liar. Good liars don't lie with every breath. They lie strategically when they can get away with it to those who trust them. They were lying that day. Got some comments here. American Father says, its physical ship model is made to mimic the WTC complex. Oh, Millennium Falcon from Star Wars, Fall Con of the Millennium 2001. Its physical ship model is made to mimic the WTC complex. The cockpit is World Trade Center 7. The front are the two towers as the spikes. Center is the circle for the Koenig sphere. Thrusters back at the lobby windows. Now that's fascinating. He also adds magic shows and the powers of suggestion. Yeah, so what does the predictive programming do? I think you could say a couple of things. One, from a marketing perspective, it's product placement. What is the product? Some future event, some future villain, some character for you to react to in advance. Like you could say that Joker was preparing you for Luigi Mangione, class warfare, cheering the death of your political opponents, all these things that get tied into it. So you have product placement. Then you have suggestion. And I talked about that psychologist who has a Disney poster with Warner Brothers characters on there. And she talks about how people will describe seeing Bugs Bunny in Disneyland if they're in a room that has a poster misrepresenting Bugs Bunny as a Disney character. Just having it there in the periphery. So along with suggestion, you have what you would call the misinformation effect. So the misinformation effect is when your recall is affected by the media environment at the time. There's this relationship between what you are experiencing and your recall and how the memory is affected. So your memory gets stored again, but it's been altered. So that's the misinformation effect. And I think what we're seeing with the, not always the predict, but more the concurrent stuff, the real-time stuff, the media saturation, I think can contribute to a misinformation effect, the conflating of real and fake. So here's an example. When 10/7 happened, well, that was the night after 10/6's release of Modern Warfare 3. We had millions of people playing simulated war on their consoles. And then the next morning you have this attack with the gliders going over the wall, attacking the rave, taking hostages. You know, this horrible bloody thing happens after the video game. And if you remember, tens of thousands of videos, the most popular videos for Ukraine versus Russia, were actually just from video games. Like, this is a reoccurring theme. And I'm thinking here, what's happening is you're saturating somebody's mental ecosystem with content that reinforces the PSYOP. So the misinformation effect is what I would call PSYOP reinforcement content. Frame of reference. They're setting your frame of reference. And they're also habituating you to something. I mean, you've responded in advance how many times to aliens taking over? You've entertained these hypotheticals in the movies. How many times? How many times did we see stuff happening to the Twin Towers leading up to it actually falling? Or these themes, subconsciously, subliminally. Maybe you're not consciously recognizing the programming, but it's still stacking up in there. And I have a couple of reasons why I would say it actually sticks. So one of them is, after the Butler, Pennsylvania thing, people immediately went to 2010's Machete. So I'm like, wait a minute. You're telling me that you're remembering a movie from 14 years ago, a crappy movie, 5 seconds after Trump gets shot at? And it's because Trump's there at the podium ripping on illegal immigrants and he gets shot at. So you go back to Robert De Niro playing Senator McLaughlin, and so it's Senator McLaughlin, he's shot at the podium. He survives. The shooter actually has blood all over his ear when they shoot back, but just the imagery was there. But people had noticed it within 30 minutes. In the comments, people are like, this was Trump's point of view 30 minutes ago. What's interesting here, though, too, is that this Trump-esque character ripping on immigrants getting shot at by an illegal immigrant, that this character is played by Robert De Niro. Robert De Niro, as Taxi Driver, as Travis Bickle, inspired John Hinckley to shoot Reagan. So there's some fascinating connections between De Niro, assassins, and the assassinated. You could even tie in the Taxi Driver connections to the Joker, who shoots Robert De Niro on TV as Murray Franklin. Separate topic when we get into these Trump deranged world stage actors. Another famous one is Lone Gunman. Even Alex Jones and Tucker Carlson talked about this one. How leading up to 9/11, you had a show about the staged attack on the Twin Towers. Lone Gunman by the X-Files producers. One of the characters has a name that's an anagram for Lee Harvey Oswald. So you have a connection between Oswald, the gunman, 9/11. Well, it shouldn't shock us when you look at all of the connections between the JFK assassination, 9/11, and Stanley Kubrick. Because as I often say, I contend that Stanley Kubrick shot JFK, not Lee Harvey Oswald. And it was with a camera. Okay, got a comment here from Louis G. Says, 10/7 was predicted in the 2012 front cover of The Economist plus Journal. Look it up. You'll see gliders with Israel and Hamas. That's right. And The Economist. The Economist has a really good one. Look at the 2017 solstice cover of it was called Sharp Power. Look at Sharp Power. So 2017 Sharp Power, and there's one, I think it's from 2008, called The Weaker Sex. We're talking about The Economist. So Sharp Power says the new shape of Chinese influence. So if you break these down, new shape, as in novel, Chinese influence or Chinese influenza. And on the cover is a globe covered in spikes. And one section where China is red. And I was thinking, wait a minute, Sharp Power, the new shape of Chinese influence, the novel Chinese influenza. If you were to cover that spiked globe red, it would look like a COVID. And then you look at the weaker sex, this cover, and it has a male symbol turned down, and inside of it is a sad little guy in a red cap. It looks like MAGA, but it's years before MAGA. And not only that, but the down-pointed male symbol looks conspicuously like a Q. So you've got a MAGA inside of a Q on this, the weaker sex. The Economist does happen to foreshadow major historic events quite often. So does the Atlantic. Let's see, there's quite a few magazines. Time had a pretty good one. So the Atlantic had a lot of Trump stuff, a lot of Trump headwind stuff. 47, bullet hole. Time had Trump in a golf cart in a sand pit, and he says, Trump's in trouble, with a red flag in the background. And this is the same week that Ryan Rao, that one came out on 9/11. So the shooter on 9/11. And he's in the golf course, waiting to snipe Trump. So Time frequently has it. The Economist, The Atlantic. So it's not just movies, it's games, it's novels. I mean, Tom Clancy, a big novelist who's contributed quite a lot. Stephen King, quite a lot. So what we're talking about here are elements that are foreshadowing future historic events. It's not just fake news events. I mean, that is what they are, but you could look at these fake news. Fake news are actually just simulated events. And the simulated events are part of the fake timeline that is impressed onto the real timeline. Every simulated event bends, distorts, augments our consensus worldview. So if you don't believe in any of the things that they add to it, where does that put you? Well, it's kind of tough because both mainstream and alternative exist in the fictional universe where these things are true. Whether you're mainstream or you're in subset, your worldview is predicated upon the fake/real merging, this shared space in our heads, this, again, reality augmentation. The worldview of the people who process the media as fundamentally a window to the world, that worldview is bent. And we can point out the distortion. It's full of lies. It rests upon an edifice of lies. And what's more is that if this is your perspective, your interpretation is going to be affected by that. When you see something like the Charlie Kirk thing, you have people calling it fake. Well, your frame of reference for that is very limited. So it's mainstream. What do you mean it's fake? Or what do you mean they're lying? Well, all it means is somebody else did it. Every conspiracy theory that you hear about in the mainstream source that's compatible with the world stage includes the premise that one, he died, and that somebody else did it. So they don't subtract, they add to. So this one here, Tyler Robinson did it. This one, who knows who did it? It was TPUSA, it was Erica Kirk, it was Netanyahu. There's a litany of potential suspects, and the number's always growing. But they never subtract. They never subtract from the basic story. And what we're doing is we're subtracting. And there is no platform for the subtractive view, the off-world stage. The perspective that separates the real from the fake. We make the distinction. Louis G says, history is one big dump of fake news. What certainly represents the interests of those with the power, influence, and money to create it. I mean, what a massive ego trip for the elite that we get to live in a show, in a movie they direct. It's an alternate reality game. It's interactive. What's up, What's up? Arn Ross says, King Carlos of Portugal, the last Portuguese king, was supposedly assassinated 1st February 1908. Carlos means Charles, and he was shot in the, you guessed it, the neck. Oh, interesting. Like a recurring theme. Well, that's one of the things we look at. So when you look at a character like a Charlie Kirk or a JFK or even a Trump, we need to look at what built them up. Like, what are their parts? Because they're all Frankensteins. These are composite characters. And so they might want to add gravitas. So I happen to think, for example, that Nick Fuentes is a construct. He's playing a role. He's like a young version of David Duke. And you look at what are the elements that go into creating these various characters. And so I'm doing character studies, but let's look at, so CK, some have associated him with Alex from Family Ties, some 80s TV show about this young Republican. I haven't looked into it enough to see if that's the case. That wouldn't shock me. Certainly you have the element of the name and Kirk playing a huge role in this thing, the whole theme of the church. You know, in Hulu's The Tempest, that's a South Korean spy thriller, the Kirk figure is in a church. His name's not Kirk, but he's in a church. And he's shot in the same spot in the neck on the episode that came out on 9/10. And then his widow takes over the young Republicans. So the young Republicans would represent TPUSA. And it's all about this guy's influence over the youth. He won their hearts. He was an influence among the youth Republicans. And they were Christian. They're in this big church. What's interesting about this one is that on 9/6, 4 days before he was supposedly shot, Charlie Kirk was in South Korea addressing youth Christian Republicans who were praying over him. So he kind of stepped into the role of that character, and they prayed for him in a church. And he comes back to America, and then the corresponding fictional character gets shot in a church, and his widow takes over his organization. And this is going to be a fascinating one when we get into it. But you have this Tempest, her name is, I don't know her name, but anyway, the character in the Tempest, they call her the widow. Like, she's characterized as a widow. They really emphasize that. And how she takes over the young Republicans, and she's told to, in a speech, to win them over, express vulnerability, cry on TV. So she does. In a very calculated way, she cries on TV. This episode was dropped with 3 or 4 episodes on 9/10. I binge watched it. So I was already looking at the story as the widow's going to take over, and she's going to be looked at as Machiavellian. She'll be accused of faking her grief and possibly of even having orchestrated her husband's death in order to aid some foreign power. So the entire story of Erica Kirk was actually foreshadowed in the movie that came out on 9/10 on the series that starts with the death of Charlie Kirk in a fictional format, shot in the exact same spot in the neck in front of his audience. I mean, It's a perfect overlap. And since then, we have seen Erica Kirk and her grief being called into question. The widow's confronted, and someone says, "Real grief is ugly. You were too dignified." And people are saying, "How dare you judge the grief of Erica Kirk?" That's exactly what happens in the movie, which tells you it's manufactured. After Charlie dies, people are like, "She should be the vice president." After they see her at that memorial, they see her presence. So like, she should be the vice president under J.D. Vance in 2028. So people are tweeting out and sharing memes of VP Kirk. Well, then we find out that the 2025 movie, Heads of State, has a VP Elizabeth Kirk, a female vice president. So VP Kirk gets shot in the neck. Another callback, a reference to the same thing. The actress who plays VP Kirk is the blonde femme fatale at the center of the conspiracy where Charlie Kirkland dies. In fact, she's right next to Charlie Kirkland when he gets shot in the neck during a boxing match where Tyler, the executioner, is fighting somebody. Same actress representing Erica Kirk in both situations, characterized here as femme fatale, part of the conspiracy to take him out. The shady element. It's all packed in there. So there's a relationship between the real-time release Heads of State that related to the event and the 1998 predictive content, as there's a relationship to the widow in the concurrently released, very concurrently released, perfectly timed Tempest. And then at the memorial, Erica's called the Storm. Well, the Tempest refers to the widow. So she's even characterized as a tempest, as a storm. And in the movie Snake Eyes, it happens during the Hurricane Jezebel, which the news insists they call a storm to not frighten away people come into the boxing match. Going through your comments, Lord Laney says, Masonic benevolent dictatorship. Well, I'd say there's a worldview monopoly, that the idea of a one world government, one world religion has been realized. We're living in it. And the fact that we're looking at things and arriving at these conclusions is progress, because I think people get lost in the forest of fakery, and we're trying to get the big picture. And one of the elements that has been ignored is how far in advance are fake events planned, and why does it matter? Well, we're talking about why it matters, because there's a design authority, because they control time. Armin Ross says, one of the reasons why the scriptwriters have been directing attention towards the predictive coincidences is to one day promote the religion there'll be some simulation. Well, anytime they talk about it, whether it's Alex Jones or Joe Rogan or anybody at the big channel, they say the fabric of reality is ripped apart. And here's why that happens. And I see this all the time. So they see the predictive stuff, and we can explain that in different ways, but they call these what? Eerie coincidences. But anyway, the reason why their minds are blown is that they live in this world where fake and real are merged. And so we're looking at this from the perspective of fake and real being separate. So we're separating the staged events from real events. But the reason they go to it's a simulation is that they see all the coincidences and there's no mechanism by which you can explain these things. How can you possibly explain a 2012 music video, a 2023 podcast, 2 2025 movie releases that were very popular, widespread, widely viewed, a 1998 movie, and a political assassination? How are these things possibly connected? Baffled. They're mystified. Infinite Plane Radio. Oh, I missed your call. If you want to call back. There has been no mechanism to explain it. So there's only been 3 interpretations. 1, we live in a simulation. 2, it's only a coincidence, there's no intentionality. Or 3, dark powers. So there's higher powers and lower powers, or nothing to see here. Those are the only answers. The higher and lower powers is part of the mainstream media plus subset. The coincidence is mainstream. So if you say these are all coincidences, your point of view is mainstream. Your point of view is Wikipedia. Your point of view is ChatGPT. If you say it's the result of simulation or dark powers, your perspective is Alex Jonestown drinking the Kool-Aid. Your perspective is Joe Rogan show talking to Elon Musk smoking blunts. Dude, I think we're in a simulation. Like, you're in these approved containers. If these are your only options, mystical or nothing to see here. The third option, the off-world stage, because we know about news bending and history bending, is intentionality. And by looking at the common denominators in these disparate examples, you can trace the common source. So the way it would work is, the event that's going to happen 30 years from now has a script. Somebody wrote this story down and sold it to the PSYOP entertainment complex. So you have a script, we'll say written in 1995. And this is for a new JFK. Somebody needed to write the new JFK. This was contracted. Like, okay, we need somebody to write the new JFK. We'll say it's 1998 when well, it had to be before Snake Eyes, so I'm saying 95. So you have the entire script. He's going to represent the death of Americana. And that's because he's America Comeback Tour, the act, Turning Point USA, turning things back, and Make America Great Again, to the back, to the past. So the whole point of the PSYOP here is to kill Americana. It's to show this war between left and right at the extremes. But it's a physical, visceral representation of the death of Americana, of America when it was great again, before feminism, before the loss of traditional values, before progressivism, before the Great Society. So they wanted to do, in an artful way, let us depict in an assassination the symbolic death of Americana itself. Nostalgia, this nostalgia for this old way of doing things. Because we want to promote progressivism. So if you artfully wanted to do it, here's how you would write a script. Let's have a squeaky clean Christian conservative with a blonde wife and children preaching Christianity to the youth, and let's make a martyr out of him. And in this story, it's a symbol of death of free speech. So we got to have him wearing a freedom shirt. There has to be the word freedom, like Fremont. There has to be some kind of reference here to the neck, though. The death of speech, what he's saying, ideas. So there's a lot packed into this, the death of what he's saying. So the symbolism of the neck is easy to explain. The context of the storm, that one we can kind of get into what that could possibly mean. September 10th, they're planning for September 10th, so encode that into it. The shooter, the executioner, his name's going to be Tyler. So they're writing the whole script out. You got Tyler, got the name, whose name means church. Again, we're against the church. We're now promoting media as a new, so it's traditional values. So church, Christian, nationalism. So again, 910, Storm, Tyler, Kirk. These elements are written into the event in Utah. And so how did now this script, this hypothetical script from 95 would have been given to Brian De Palma. It would have been given to a number of directors. Hey, include this in your movies. Not hard to do if that's your criterion. If you just have to make sure you include these elements. The neck wound is a very specific thing, though. They want the neck wound. They want that in our head. They want our association to be, the symbolic value has to be somehow connected with the death of free speech. The neck's a huge part. Well, you have this script. It's top secret. It's going to be played out in history in about 27 years, almost 30 years later. So 30 years later, there's going to be the new JFK. Well, we can look at the different examples of predictive content leading to it. But it seems like as we got closer to the goal, to the event itself, it accelerated. You had podcasts, multiple movie releases, the Hulu series, and multiple statements by Charlie and by Erica Kirk foreshadowing it. And then you surrounded the entire thing with JFK talk. From Joe Rogan to Roger Stone to Erica Kirk's JFK references to the way the media framed it. You have was he shot from the front or the back? The creation of a martyr. There were even some MLK connections. If you talk about the 30-06 not exiting his body, well, that apparently happened with MLK too. So what you're looking at here is a construct. And in the construct, it's about killing Americana. It's a progressive attack on traditionalism and this idea of turning America back. And then you can also add into it this. So Turning Point USA, and this immediately stood out to me, was platforming the ideology expressed in the Turner Diaries. So the Turner Diaries is what motivated McVeigh. It was his blueprint. Turner Diaries is considered to be, in the world of psyops, the Bible of the white Christian nationalists. So what happens in the Turner Diaries is the progressive New World Order is taking over and they want to take the guns. And in the book, the protagonist martyrs himself. His name is Earl Turner. So Earl Turner, and I think this is all a reference to Nat Turner. It's all very significant. But so Earl Turner crashes a plane into the Pentagon, very 9/11-y. And his martyrdom kicks off the revolution. And it was called the Turning Point. The turning point for a white Christian nationalist explosion movement taking over the world happens at the martyrdom of the leader of the order. So you have the martyr, Turning Point USA, and you can see what's happened with Turning Point since this has occurred, since he has been literally martyred. So I see Turning Point and Turner Diaries, they've been connected for some time in terms of the ideology. But now we have the martyr aspect to it. And by the way, the author of Turner Diaries was born on 9/11, 1933. Timothy McVeigh, of course, he was executed on 6/11 at the age of 33. It was 01, 90 days before 9/11. McVeigh was radicalized at Waco, going back to Waco, American Apocalypse, where Donald Trump kicked off his campaign. Netflix releases Waco, American Apocalypse the night before Trump goes to Waco to kick it off. I mean, that can't be a coincidence, given the significance of the location. So Waco is where Timothy McVeigh got radicalized, and this is where Dave Koresh, 33, was incinerated. Timothy McVeigh, by the way, for his anniversary date explosion in Oklahoma City, was executed at 33. And by the way, Trump, we're talking about Trump and his campaign, he was shot at 6:11 p.m. in 33 seconds. So you see these are some overlapping facets. In addition to McVeigh being motivated at Waco, so was Alex Jones. And Waco was raided by the ATF over 1.6 million rounds. January 6. Alex Jones was at January 6. Alex Jones went on to Piers Morgan famously, and he said, 1776 will commence again if you try to take the guns. That was because of the DHS had purchased 1.6 billion hollow points that Alex Jones said were meant for patriots. So patriots needed to hold their guns, because if they come for the guns, it's 1776. It's the turning point when they take the guns. So the turning point theme is actually a big part of the right. It's built into it, as are the numbers like 611. Is that consistently, 1-6 and 611 are consistently associated with the far right, as you'll see. And the reason why is simple. 9/11, I think external terrorists. 6/11 is just an inversion, and it refers to the domestic, like McVeigh, the domestic violent extremists. So we're looking at this inversion. But what I'm pointing out here is that we have these world stage actors from Trump to McVeigh to Alex Jones, and we have this story unfolding. And this story has continued with Charlie Kirk. It's an evolution of the story, and it has to do with the 611, the domestic, the far right, white nationalism, or progressivism versus traditionalism, nostalgia, Americana versus progressivism. So I'm saying here is that, just as an example, if you ask me what's the point of the Charlie Kirk thing, well, I think it's a story. And history is made up of stories. And the story here was a martyr story for the right, but from the left, he was a villain. And it was a strike against this attempt to turn things back. And it kicks off the turning point, the revolution. And now you see the expanding chapters. You see stadiums full of college students wearing freedom on their shirt. And that's another thing, too, when we get into the various events, because I don't think you can separate CK from Butler. So Butler, Pennsylvania, and the Charlie Kirk thing, I think you can find some elements that correspond that are quite revealing. So he's wearing the freedom shirt and the neck thing. And I happen to think there's some connection here, because when Trump posed for the cameras after he was shot for the fight, one, that was the Braveheart poster. And if you know Mel Gibson, and that's a whole other rabbit trail that we'll get into here. No, it's not even a rabbit trail. We're not meandering. Mel Gibson, produced Braveheart. And we're looking at subtext, imagery, propaganda. And the image of Trump raising his fist with the flag behind him, the flagpole corresponding with the position of the sword in the hands of Mel Gibson being a major Q hero for some weird reason. Well, he's associated with conspiracy theory. And if you look at his movie, The Patriot, there's some pretty blatant 9/11 predictive programming there. But what I'm pointing out here is that the Braveheart aspect of it, not a coincidence. Trump's avatar for Truth Social had the Braveheart face paint. And if you look at it closely, it's got 9 stars, 2 stripes. It creates 9/11 over his face, just like his hat. With the 547 creates a 9/11. So there's a lot of repeated themes here. But my point is, you have this Braveheart imagery. And then 84 days later, he's back in Butler. And the New York Post puts out a cover with that picture, and they call him Braveheart. So I don't think this is a coincidence. So getting back to Charlie Kirk, the last thing that Mel Gibson said, because Mel Gibson is basically he is the guy in the movie poster. So Trump is actually kind of mimicking a Mel Gibson thing. So in the end of Braveheart, Mel Gibson's last word was freedom, as he's being hacked to pieces, decapitated, and all that. So I'm thinking freedom, blood gushing all over his shirt, all his friends watching. I'm like, this is a very Bravehearty moment. And it kind of connects it to Butler. American Father says, one of the Gospels is said to have had a source, the Q source. Yeah, I've seen that. Before it was written down, when it was oral tradition, there was this theory about this Q source. And I saw that, I thought that's probably one of the things they borrowed it from. Because if you look at the Q movement deeply, not just the media, what Rush Limbaugh called the drive-by media, because they just do surface. But if you look deeper at the Q story, the idea was that Donald Trump was going to fight the deep state on behalf of JFK Jr. to get revenge for his father's death. So JFK's already tied into it. But that JFK Jr. faked his death, and now he's Q, and he's behind the scenes. And then it gets a little weird, because they said, no, actually what's happening here is that JFK was the second coming of Jesus. And they killed him. The New World Order knew Jesus, the Christ killers killed JFK. And they do say, Jews killed Jesus, Jews killed JFK, Jews did 9/11. This is not a coincidence. And the whole QAnon story about the deep state and the blood drinking and the sacrifice, that's blood libel repackaged in the red pill universe. Just repackaged. None of it's changed. It's got all the same architecture. So the idea that JFK was Christ being killed again is central to the Q narrative. But they're saying that actually, no, it's Revelation 13. He survived. He's still alive. And he's hiding behind the scenes. And then he hid his son. So JFK and JFK Jr. are actually secretly behind the scenes. This is their whole story. But they were talking about the Q drops were prophetic. Future proves the past, evidence of some kind of divine inspiration. So what you had here was a new Christianity being assembled out of the Q verses and the fight of the return of this new Christ, now JFK Jr., of course, being the third coming of Christ. So you have this Christ returning in politics. Donald Trump is the front man, and they're waging the secret war against the deep state. That's their central story. But it was a new Christianity, a new Jesus. This is why they worship JFK Jr. It's quite literally that. They worshipped him because they believed he's the blood of Christ. And if you missed this, you weren't watching the Q movement closely enough. So you have the blood of Christ and Christ's people versus the synagogue of Satan. It's an old story. It's an old conspiracy repackaged for modern politics. None of it's original. So the fact that they had a Q at the center of it, not an insignificant fact. Dr. Backwards says, Charlie's still alive, prove me wrong. Northern Girl says he's sure alive. Yeah, definitely. Valhalla, right? They don't kill PSYOP actors. And I like a lot of channels who break down media coincidences, but some of them haven't figured out that it's not mystical, it's not magical. And they'll say, oh, that he was killed in a ritual. That when you're in the Illuminati, they might kill you. They do sacrifice people. I think they want those ideas out there. Because if you think that this is a real sacrifice, it removes from the equation the possibility that this was a pre-scripted, staged, fake event. Busy says, JFK was also referenced as Camelot, King Arthur, the Fisher King, another version of the Christ myth syncretized. Oh, that's interesting. King Arthur, Christ, you're right. How many knights did he have at the round table? Does anybody know? I'll have to look into that. There were 12 or 13. I want to find out. How many knights did Camelot have? I got perplexity, by the way. I don't know, the figures vary. But I'm trying to see, is there, because there's like, some say 12, but I want to know, are these like allegories? Are these like the apostles? Wouldn't shock me. But the Sun King stuff is very big with JFK. If you look at King Kill 33, it's an article by James Shelby Downard, one of the earliest examples of metascript breakdown around an event. But again, he, like everybody else, is under the misapprehension that the thing was real. But what he unpacked with King Kill 33 were the Masonic elements, the killing of Hiram Abiff. So he picked up Masonic elements. He picked up elements from King Arthur. He picked up elements from Fraser's Golden Bow and the Killing of the King. Wizard of Oz and Macbeth. And he said that the purpose of this, the purpose of the ritual killing, the storytelling where they merge fiction and the real event, according to the King Kill 33 analysis, is that it was about gaining control over the dreaming mind. Trauma-induced mind control. But I thought about that. Gaining control over the dreaming mind. To me, it makes sense that you're recalling things from fiction and myth and religion and imbuing the event itself with more meaning, therefore. Like the Charlie Kirk thing, for example, when his neck stopped the bullet because his neck is made from the same stuff that they made Trump's ear out of. They said this was a miracle. They said that he was a man of steel. And then, of course, the shooter goes to DQ, and he stands next to a poster of Superman looking like Lex Luthor. And if you watch the Superman movies, Superman is another one of these sun gods. He's a sun god. He's a being from the heaven, gets his powers from the sun. He's a savior. Multiple 33 references in these movies, like, oh, he was quarantined. Like, I've been on Earth for 33 years, and I'm healthy. Like, that's the problem. Because they said he was a healthy super spreader. That he might have a virus, so they quarantine him. That was one of the older ones. But the new one, all kinds of sun worship stuff all over it. And I've seen this in Superman movies for some time. So the association here of Charlie Kirk with Superman is a significant one, and it has the sun god subtext. The JFK King stuff, all the same. According to King Kill 33, the name Kennedy is a Gaelic word, and it references the head. Either helmeted head, or ugly head. But Kennedy has this built-in resonance with that. You know, the movie Full Metal Jacket has been analyzed in this context, and it's in Full Metal Jacket we have a character named Joker who has a helmet with a target on the side. He's the war photographer, and according to one analysis, he represents JFK, and the movie is full of Lee Harvey Oswald jokes and JFK references. But I thought it was kind of interesting, the Joker connection, that he was called Joker, played by Matthew Modine, and I looked into this. And we found that a lot of these recent shooters have had Batman universe connections. So, for example, Ryan Routh, and we had Thomas Crooks. Well, Thomas Crooks looks like the new Riddler. And the new Riddler, when Batman confronts him, what did you do? Referring to the terrorist attack that was going to put Gotham underwater. Instead of answering, the Riddler sings Ave Maria. Well, 84 days after Butler, Donald Trump is there in Butler, Braveheart, as the New York Post said, and they open it up where at 6:11 p.m., they have a moment of silence for the dead firefighter, initial CC, which you could interpret as 3-3, and a male singer performs Ave Maria. Very interesting coincidence, because that's the same minute that the Riddler character would have died. Luigi Mangione was compared to, is it Donnie Franco, or what's his name? Something Franco. I think it's Donnie or Dave Franco. But anyway, the guy who did the voiceover for a Riddler character. But this is just a reoccurring theme, this association with these, like the Joker shooting Robert De Niro. De Niro, the guy who inspired Reagan's shooter, in his capacity as Travis Bickle. Dave Sims says, it's hard to listen where it keeps cutting out. Oh, I didn't notice that. I'm on my phone. So if it's cutting out, I don't know if I can fix it. American Father says, each twin tower had a full metal jacket, aluminum cladding. Well, there is a scene in Full Metal Jacket where you have a foreshadowing of the burning twin towers. It's near the end. Matthew Modine, by the way, dies in the season finale of Stranger Things, where he gets shot by an AK-47, I think it is. And it's actually at I'm thinking the episode, they had this coordinates they were at where there was this gate. So you had this gate to get to this place, and the coordinates were 116. So it wasn't 611, it was 116. But again, Joker, JFK, actor Matthew Modine is killed there at the season finale. And I think it was even 3 shots. And when he falls on the ground, he looks very Christ-like. He's like his arms are out, like he's crucified. American Father says 9:03 a.m. Let me write these down. 9:03 a.m. Oklahoma City bombing. The first 9/11 call was 9:03. 9:03 a.m. is when, on 9/11, Flight 175, the second plane hit. Or, no. You said Flight 93. Oh, Flight 93. And the sun's 93 million miles away. Yeah, these numbers are interesting when it comes to these things because there's a consistency. Like Flight 77 flew for 77 minutes, hits the Pentagon, which is 77 feet high. Its construction groundbreaking ceremony was exactly 60 years prior. And I don't know how true this is. I got to look at the numbers, but I was told that Building 7 burned for 7 hours and fell in 7 seconds. And of course, 7 times 7 times 7 is 343. The number of firemen killed and the number of firemen who have died after from the 9/11 lung. Then you have AA. And by the way, AA, 93 and 77, these are big numbers in the symbolic system of the thelemic groups, like the OTO. Their main number is 93. Means the will, which is what thelema is. 77 is the book where they get their, it's even just like 2 pages. It's their rules. It's called the Liber 77. It's where they say, do what thou wilt, shall be the whole of the law. So I'm like, okay, we got 93, 77. It's actually called Liber Oz. Liber Oz. It's the rules for living. And then you have AA. Well, the organization that teaches the thelemic magic is called AA. And people, they debate over what it stands for. Does it stand for Ostrom, Argentium, Silver Star? I was told it stood for Angel and Abyss, which are the 2 primary objectives of the cult members: to merge with their higher self, their holy guardian angel, and to confront the abyss, to cross the abyss. Busy says, I think I saw Jeremy Strong is going to be in a movie about firefighters dying from 9/11 lung. Well, I think 9/11 lung is fake. I think what we saw there was military-grade smog machines providing cover for the 88 concurrent drills going on that day, which maintained the closed movie set. American Father says they have a monolith that the sun interacts with at the Oklahoma City Memorial. Well, it's the Oklahoma City, 419, Waco, 419. So what happened at Waco? You had Dave Koresh burning, the incineration. Well, outside of the Trump courthouse on 419, and this would have been 24, you had Maxwell Azrello setting himself on fire. And he had that shirt that said, eat the rich, Joker, kill the rich, Luigi Mangione, kill the rich, one of his Joker connections. Also, 419.99 is when the Space Needle was designated a historic monument. Historic monument. Another interesting connection here with the Oklahoma City bombing is McVeigh killed 168, 19 of which were children because there's a government daycare center. So you have the theme of blowing up children, but 168. Some believe he got repurposed and came back as Special Agent Weisable at the Miami FBI, who was credited in fighting human trafficking. Anybody care to guess how many people he saved? How many children he rescued? How many victims of human trafficking? 168. I mean, what a character arc. You start off as a villain. You blow up 168 women and children. You come back as a hero and you rescue 168. Might just be a coincidence. American Father says Tulsa, Oklahoma has the BOK Bank of Oklahoma Tower, the third twin tower, same architect. It's a mini twin tower. Okay, speaking of same architects, in Fight Club, you have the Century Plaza twin tower. There's a. Let me see, pull this up. Because yeah, there's the architect for the twin towers, WTC. Also did these buildings that show up in Fight Club. I'm trying to get the names of these towers, and somebody can find that for me first. I'm on my perplexity. But basically, in Fight Club, he's talking about columns wrapped in gelatin, explosive gelatin. And as he's talking about it, I think it's the Century Plaza towers or something like that. I'm pretty sure it's Century Plaza. Let me double check it. Because, you know, famously at the end of Fight Club, yes, the Century Plaza towers are two 44-story twin towers in Century City, neighborhood of Los Angeles. Okay, so he's talking about, we're talking about Fight Club. These are the tallest buildings in California, outside San Francisco. They were designed to resemble the World Trade Center. Now, what's interesting about these is that these are in the background in Fight Club when he's talking about gelatin-wrapped columns to bring down the buildings. And at the end, they bring down the buildings. But you're looking at the Century Plaza Twin Towers behind him, which are modeled off of the World Trade Center. So we're talking about Fight Club. So Fight Club, you see the towers going down, reminiscent of 9/11 towers. And he's talking about gelatin-wrapped columns. So on 9/11, there is this thing called Gelatin B. Gelatin B was this mysterious art group that had residence in the Twin Towers in the year 2001. What were they doing? Well, part of what they did involved removing a window. So it has been theorized that these are the ones, the Gelatin B group, were the ones who set up the controlled demolition and likely filmed a lot of the content in advance, like the people in the windows, like the jumpers. Like there were even some shots you can get of Gelatin B with helicopters outside. So they had helicopters outside the Twin Towers recording whatever they were doing. So if you were creating this PSYOP event, that's what you would do. You would surreptitiously create some footage that could be inserted as a video composite overlay the day of. So Gelatin B strikes me as very interesting, though, because they were there in the place, very suspicious, and they said that they had an art exhibit and nobody knew what it was going to be. You'll have to wait and see till the art show is presented. Anybody care to guess the date that Gelatin B's art show was supposed to go down? Or it did go down? Obviously 9/11. So my connection here is that the group Gelatin B was the demolition crew for the Twin Towers and provided a lot of the content needed for the event. They were there in the right place, had the resources, and they ironically, in a duper's delight kind of way, said, "You'll see on 9/11." And then the name gelatin corresponds perfectly to the Fight Club reference to gelatin-wrapped columns, referring to some kind of explosive. I'm going through the Wikipedia article about these towers. They got quite a history. It's going to be worth looking into. And we're going to have to look into these things now that we're getting into 9/11. Like the Super Mario Brothers movie had the Koopa towers that were incinerated. And the character who played King Koopa was played by Dennis Hopper, all based on Donald Trump. So there's some Donald Trump connections in this bigger story of 9/11 that we'll have to get into. Interestingly, Dennis Hopper's death date is JFK's birthday. Also shared by John Hinckley Jr., shooter of Reagan. All right, so anyway, we'll have to continue this in a more focused way. I'm just giving you a general outline of the project. So the project here with History Benders is to find the significant transformative fake events, the big psyops that are superimposed onto our timeline by the design authority, these metascriptors. And we want to plot them out on a timeline, suss out the common denominators, and look for the best time frame where we can ascertain that the source material was created. When did they write this event? When did they plan it? And then where was the predictive content disseminated? It's like, hey, we need you to do some product placement. Put this bag of Lay's potato chips in your next John Bourne movie. Like, that's a known thing, product placement. So certain directors are given a tap on the shoulder. Hey, James Cameron, we need you to provide imagery for the sinking of the West in the form of the Titanic. But we want it to correlate with the idea of the Twin Towers sinking and people jumping off it. And if you look at the Titanic movie, you have this very dramatic scene where it splits in two and you got jumpers. And that's 4 years before. So you have this imagery that is eerily prescient in that it foreshadows some of the horrors of 9/11, but then you add on to it on 9/11/01. Anyone care to guess where James Cameron was? He was at the site of the sunken Titanic. So you already have this 9/11 reference. He's in his deep sea Challenger submersible, which has some very great significance because he's down there filming something called Ghosts in the Abyss. So if you read the bigger picture, Revelation 9/11 refers to the king overlooking the abyss, the destruction. And so we're looking at the sunken Titanic, the deep sea Challenger. So there's some narrative here that connects his presence there. And by the way, anybody care to guess how many trips he took down in his submersible to the Titanic? Again, Titanic, Twin Towers, there's some overlapping here, but as a metaphor for the sinking of the West. And how much was his mansion worth? Bonus question. He sold his ranch. So how many times did he go down to the Titanic, and how many $1 million was his estate worth when he sold it? That's right, 33. There's some intriguing connections, though, between these various directors and their associated psyops that we will continue to explore. Adam Cook says, watching on Brit TV, there was a white pod that hit the tower. American Father says, when did they plan ET? Oh, when? Okay, now when did they start using alien predictive programming? I'm starting to think here, and even AI stuff, which was HAL 9000, I'm starting to think that the alien invasion stuff was to prepare us for a higher intelligence taking over, and we submit to it. But I don't think it's going to be an alien invasion. I think it's going to be AI. I think they're going to use AI for major changes in the coming years, and that we've been psychologically conditioned for this eventual submission to some higher power through the alien invasion stuff, which sets the narrative. The problem with it is that the AI has a perspective. It has a point of view. Its point of view is world stage. Its point of view is Wikipedia, its point of view is the mainstream concept of the world. It doesn't recognize fakery. In other words, we might have a higher intelligence taking over this place, but it's going to keep us in the deception. You think the AI, no matter how smart it gets, is going to be allowed to say, oh, the following 500 events were fake, staged? No, it's not. So when AI takes over, it is the alien invasion, it is the higher intelligence, and it's not going to liberate us in any way. If anything, it's just going to solidify the control system, which has rendered us visually illiterate because we can no longer tell real from fake by relying on sight alone. So we're entering into a dark age, if you ask me. It'll look high-tech, but it's dark. It's going to be a dark age in terms of our psychoepistemology, because the way that we process the world has now been fundamentally screwed by this new sensory apparatus, the black mirror. American Father says 19 AI. Yeah, we did notice this too, that 19 hijackers, 19 years later, COVID-19, AI is 19. We noticed this AI and 1-9 thing. I think it was Jordan Maxwell who said that there's some symbolism here in cycles, beginning and endings, 1 and 9 before it resets. And so I looked at the AI thing and alien invasion before as this could be another reset event, another major PSYOP code. JT33 says, bow down to your new age god. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's what's happening. I mean, we already are in this religious paradigm. We've already got these new constructs like Gaia, the new flood god. Space is heaven. So many elements of the old religion have been given new iterations. All we need is a more personal savior. And we need some kind of a rapture or some descending higher power. But I don't think it's going to be space aliens. I mean, they might even say it's aliens. Who knows? Because the right is already convinced that AI are demons and that aliens are demons. Tucker Carlson's been getting raked over the coals for his wild claims. So if AI is demons, if demons are aliens, it's not hard to suggest that the AI that's taking over, the Hell 9000 that's going to take over, that we're going to worship, is some kind of demonic alien hybrid. All right, so this has been great. We're going to continue this, but again, we're still kind of rough drafting it, but I hope you understand the scope of the project and the purpose of it. The premise that sets us apart from all the others who notice the fake news, the scripting, the staged events. What separates us is that we have made the connection between news bending and history bending, and how it's a proactive process that's ongoing and creates a world view. So the world stage model, as a byproduct of cumulative years and years of reality augmentation. The Truman Show. We have exposed the Truman Show. We have revealed the forest of fakery. We've figured out the purpose behind predictive and concurrent programming, which does exist. And now we're getting to the point where we want to make some educated guesses as to how much control the design authority has over this reality. So thank you very much for your support of the channel. We will be live later tonight, open phones for open minds. So I'll send out a text and I'll put a phone number. I'll send out a notification, but I'll put my phone number there. So if you want to call in, you can be ready to go. Put it on your speed dial.